Welcome to Sickcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for joining us for another Sikh Current Events podcast. It's been 30 years since the abduction, torture, and extrajudicial murder of Jaswant Singh Khalra by the Punjab Police. During Punjab's Decade of Darkness, from 1984 to 1995, Jaswant Singh witnessed the mass torture and forced disappearance of many Sikhs under the guise of counter-terrorism. Struck by the disappearances he witnessed, the trauma he saw so many endure, and the impunity with which the Punjab Police and the Indian state at large operated, he decided to act. Jaswant Singh traveled from cremation ground to cremation ground, carefully documenting the number of Sikhs anonymously cremated, collecting evidence of the extent of the Punjab Police's horrific actions. He exposed the machinery of the police who abducted, tortured, and killed Sikhs, cremating their remains, leaving them unknown to history and leaving their families without closure. His work in exposing killings and cremations of tens of thousands of Sikhs was a painstaking and astronomical task that he did with love, conviction, and care. This work was also dangerous, but he carried it out in Jadikala, rising power, drawing on a deep well of love and a commitment to truth and justice. In the spirit of generations of shaheeds, martyrs, who came before him, he willingly laid down his life, disappeared by the Punjab Police, not even his body returned to his family. So why are we here today? It's been 30 years and there's a lot that we know about Jaswant Singh Khalra from popular narratives, but there's also a lot that we don't. Today we are interested in more context and in pursuing questions of why, so that we can build a more holistic understanding of his fearless contributions to the Panth, and, informed by his example, continue to push for justice for Sikhs in Punjab and India at large. I'm joined today by Harinder Singh, Senior Fellow and Innovation Director at Sikh. Fateh Harinder Singh, thank you for joining us. So I started us off with a bit of context on who Jaswant Singh Khalra was and in the more sort of general narratives that we have around him, but I was wondering if you could maybe take us back even further. So the work that I described, and even as I read about what feels like an impossible kind of bravery, it feels like it must have come from a deep conviction or maybe even a tradition of activism that Jaswant Singh was sort of slotting into or drawing upon. And I have read that his grandfather was also an activist. So maybe you can tell us a bit about that and anything else that might give us a better understanding of who Jaswant Singh was and why he chose to become an activist, like what might have fueled him in such a large undertaking.
Sure. Jasleen, at the onset, I think it's important to also in this context say that we are products of our environments. We grow up in particular families, in particular social stratas, in particular cultural and political milieus, and all of them inform us. So in his case, only about a month or so ago, I was actually in Surrey when the city of Surrey was commemorating Guru Nanak Jahaz, aka Kamagata Maru anniversary. And in that narrative, there have been so many revisions and omissions. And part of that connection, which is happening from that earlier saga of what happened in 1914 in Vancouver, is that Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra's grandfather, Dadaji, Harnam Singh, was on that ship. And he was an ally of, he worked co-worker, and as they like to say in those days, comrade of Baba Gurditt Singh, who had chartered that ship. And Baba Harnam Singh was somebody who moved to Shanghai in 1914. He was part of this Guru Nanak Jahaz journey. When they were turned back into from the port in Vancouver back to India, once they arrived back there, he was also arrested and tried under the Lahore conspiracy case in 1915. And in his case, although Baba Gurditt Singh and other people were found guilty, But Harnam Singh wasn't, who was Jaswant Singh Khalra's grandfather, but he was under house arrest, I think, for several years until 1922. So this is the time when early part of his, when his father is born during this house arrest, and to his father, eventually Jaswant Singh Khalra is born in 1952. So there is this element of Gadar, which was a revolt against British India. And British India, why? Because the question of why is equally important going back to his lineage legacy, because they were fighting for freedom in South Asia. Now we call India, Pakistan, and several other countries. So there is that element of in his background. Then his growing up from 1952 to 1995, he's age 43 when they abduct him and torture him and extrajudicially murder him. He goes through his own middle class upbringing. He's looking at joining the left wing student politics of 1970s Punjab. He's observing the politics of emergency of India. He's also observing the Shiromani Akali Dal vis-a-vis Sikhs, as well as its confrontation with the Union government of India in 1980s. So he's observing all that. And while he's a student union leader, he becomes a panchayat secretary at his village in Khalra. He sets up a library. Many of these things are happening, and he's responding to it from his earlier background of activism in the family to the left-leaning politics of Punjab at the time. And he's looking and witnessing all this in 1980s as well. So yes, there is a lot in the background, but it starts with the fighting for people's freedom, fighting against the state you live in, or fighting against a state which has occupied you.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. And I think, it's a perfect segue into the second question I have of it's not just the familial context that sort of forms who we are or shapes what we care about and what we do about it, but also what's going on outside of the house, politically and socially, and religiously. So this question that I have next is about that. Can you go into more detail about sort of the atmosphere during Punjab's decade of darkness, that period of 84 to 95, and maybe if you want to start a little bit earlier, that's totally fine too, but just contextualizing that so that we can better understand the work that Jaswant Singh eventually is doing once he's committing himself to becoming an activist during that period. And then maybe what sorts of things he involved himself in, how he was politically engaged outside of or sort of in tandem with his human rights work. That would all be very helpful.
In fact, the human rights work comes later. His 70s onward is very much what we today call organizing, agitating, protesting, student politics, to village level panchayat politics. And he was trained in that politics from the left-wing, leftist politics of Punjab and India at the time. So during those times, he did not agree, for example, when and this is very important to understand, that our trainings drive part of our ideological worldview and part of the alliances we make in terms of when we are operating in the realities of Punjab or India, or whichever region we might be in today. So at the time, for example, in 1970s, Sardar Kapoor Singh is the one who's drafting Anandpur Sahib resolution. And he's a student leader and a panchayat leader, secretary at the time. And he opposes that system. He says, no, India doesn't need the federal system. India needs more of a confederation of India and Pakistan. And similarly, when he's witnessing emergencies, he obviously opposed the emergency, but he favored more of a broad coalition for the decentralization of power. So there's a larger agreement on decentralization of power and then respecting the fundamental human rights of people. But there's a disagreement he had in terms of how Akalis were doing it. But, he's seeing all this. He's seeing in 1980s, pre-1984, genocidal campaigns in Punjab and rest of India, the rise of not just the political leaders of traditional Akalis, three veins, which included Prakash Singh Badal, Gurcharan Singh Thoda, Japteg Singh Talwandi, as well as Sant Harchand Singh Longowal, and also then Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale. So he's observing all that, and he is on the record saying that he did not agree with the approach of Bhindranwale, but he agreed that the Sant was instrumental in channelizing the aspirations of the youth of Punjab and the underprivileged of Punjab, because the fight was for justice. So there was an acknowledgement of the why it is being done, but now how it was being done. And he's at the same time looking at that when these 1984 and onwards, what is happening in Punjab, as we call it, the decade of, so, human rights world calls it the decade of darkness. The Sikh narrative does not call it a decade of darkness, actually. It actually calls it the decade to regain its independence. Sometimes it is presented as a Khalistan movement, but even the ones who do not agree with the Khalistan movement or subscribe to it, they do agree it was for the right of Punjabis and Sikhs. And this is why even elections were won by militant sympathizers in 80s in Punjab as well. So in that regard, he's looking at it that who's breaking the rule of law? Who are the ones committing atrocities? Is it just the militant groups or is it the state? So he's looking at all those. And while he's doing all these things, look, he had set up, for example, in his 1970s student politics, he has set up something called Naujawan Bharat Sabha, which is the young people of India in terms of opposing what was happening. Similarly, in 80s, he's working through other systems where he's more observing, but they're still left systems. But eventually, when the human rights violations became very huge and systematic, when two of his colleagues at his bank got disappeared, this is when he starts looking at it directly in what his legacy has become known as, that the one who went to 3 cremation grounds in Punjab, and there he discovered almost 2,100 bodies, to be more exact. I think the number is 2,097. That's the legacy which we are aware of. But all that is happening in his observation of 80s and 90s as well. And I think it's very important to mention here at the same time that when he has to join to work in Punjab, the leftist groups were not supporting this element. Who did he eventually end up joining to do this work? This work was supported by Shromani Akali Dal, which is the mainstream Sikh political party. At the time, it was still Sikh political party. Only in 1995, it became a Punjabi political party. And that's important differentiation. And they created a wing called the Human Rights Wing. And in that Human Rights Wing, he was the general secretary of this work. Jaswant Singh Khalra was its chairman, and Amrit Singh Muksar was the vice chairman. I remember getting involved with that activity, but I'll come to that a little bit later. But this is important to understand. We may have certain things to say about Akalis and SGPCs and how the Sikh politics internally gets played out. But what is equally important is when atrocities were at its height, when police officers were giving rewards for killing by quota systems in Punjab, which are extensively documented by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and then INSAF, and then earlier Punjab Human Rights Organization, which have been acknowledged by National Human Rights Commission of India as well, and CBI inquiries of India, and acknowledged by Supreme Court of India. Eventually, all of this happened because this documentation actually started at Shromani Akali Dal's Human Rights Wing, which was a Sikh political party centered in Amritsar, which allowed this documentation's initial work to happen.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of blowing my mind. Okay. Well, you had alluded to it just now, but when we were talking, you said you never met Jaswant Singh, but you did work for his organization while he was alive, and I'm interested in what you can tell us about that work. That might help offer a more holistic understanding of the later period in his career, and give us a sense of his political and sort of human rights pursuits in that decade.
Jasleen, just a minor correction. I think working will be a very strong word. No, I didn't work, but I took the work they did.
Sure, yeah.
And disseminated it. I remember that I graduated in my Kansas days in aerospace engineering in 1993. And in 1994, I actually was getting faxes from Shromani Akali Dal's Human Rights Wing um, sometimes multiple times in a month at my work, I remember, because I didn't have fax machine at home. And that used to come from Jaswant Singh Khalra. As I mentioned earlier, that he was the chair of that organization, that wing rather. And what used to happen was there used to be reports, whatever they have discovered in last couple of weeks. And I would get some of that, and part of my work was to disseminate that to the Sikh and the non-Sikh organizations within America, because this was genuinely documentation work. This was not a hidden work. This was an open work. This was talking about atrocities which international agencies and human rights organizations were already talking about, but these were the field workers. So part of my work was essentially just to disseminate that. And I remember I started that in 1994. I also remember that in 1995, there was a press release issued by Jaswant Singh Khalra when he went public with the allegations of the police abductions and disappearances and illegal cremations which were taking place. And the court did take note of that, and that happened on 16th January 1995. The date is important because that's when everything came out publicly. And it was not hidden anymore. And what happens from January 1995 is very, very important, because after that, later that year is when he's abducted and extrajudicially killed, and many other things take off from this. So during this time, he's traveling, right? He's traveling. He had gone to, in fact, this is another thing I would like to just mention here, that he grew up where his brother had already emigrated. Two of his brothers had emigrated to UK. And if I'm not mistaken, one had gone to Austria, although all his sisters were married in Punjab. And this is the time he had gone to England and come back in 1990. But in 1993 to 1995, he's also starting to talk about these issues in Canada. And this is important because this diaspora politics get played out even today, and sometimes in a very media savvy way, very fiery way. But his work was that I'm going to take all this to the world wherever people will listen to it. And he was meeting MPs of the political parties of these countries. He was meeting with human rights organizations of these countries, and he was doing it openly.
Wow. Well, and then I guess that leads us into the major question, which is why was Jaswant Singh Khalra killed?
Well, because that answer is simple, but I think it's something we need to. I don't think we are able to digest that fully, because why questions are always very hard. The answers are simple. Why was he killed? Because he showed that there were extrajudicial killings in Punjab. And the state administration, the politicians, the judiciary, the CBI, which is the central body, the Union Government of India, the paramilitary forces, the local MLAs, and not just the police, they were all involved in this. Now, this is very important to understand, because the propaganda which started was these human rights workers they're not human rights workers. And he openly references this in his speech, because KPS Gill, who was a Director General of Police at the time in Punjab, he was interviewed by SBS Australia, I remember that, where he clearly, explicitly was asked, is there any truth to these? He says no. He completely lied about it. He was second time asked about this by, I think, MJ Akbar, who's an Indian journalist, and he completely denied it again. So when you are in complete denial, and now you have evidence which are being reported by Indian journalists, international journalists, they're being recorded by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, this is starting to, and there is evidence, right? This is not a hearsay. And this evidence later was accepted by the courts in Punjab and Haryana, as well as Supreme Court and National Human Rights Commission. All of this is getting accepted. So this is not propaganda. This is explicitness. This is evidence based on the cremation grounds cases in 3 three cremation grounds in one district of Punjab. And this is where the term 25,000 was extrapolation. That's how it came about. Based on the initial work this human rights wing did under the Shromani Akali Dal, led by Sardar Jaswant Singh Khalra, with two people, Jaspal Singh Dhillon and Amrik Singh Muksar, their initial work showed that this actually happened. So the propaganda of the state actually got countered. This is why KPS Gill would say, what Khalra is saying, that these people are not extrajudicially killed, they're actually running around in America and Canada and Europe. So this politics of diaspora is actually started by the state propaganda through the mouth of then Director General of Police, KPS Gill.
Wow.
And it is actually, those are the countries he's going to then. He was not able to come to US, so he went to those countries and talked to the MPs of those countries to show that these people actually been killed in Punjab. So the propaganda which was articulated by the Director General of Police of the time was countered by Jaswant Singh Khalra and his organization's work. And they systematically did it, that eventually it was accepted by the Supreme Court of India. Now, why was he killed? Because, and by the way, his wife is on the record talking about this. His lawyer, Rajvinder Singh Bains, is on the record talking about this. The 7 people who were convicted, 7 of the 9 who were tried for his extrajudicial killing, 6 of them were given life sentences. 2 of them are on the record talking about this as well. This was done at the highest level using all state machineries, and that's why he was killed.
Yeah. And I feel like we've talked about this a lot, but the act of like documentation and record keeping, and also like literally accounting to hold people accountable, is such a like threat that I don't think we realize until sort of the consequences of that work happen or are doled out by the state. So I think that's a good reminder for us all of like, work that we think is,
And he referred to that in his last speech, his famous last speech, right? Where everyone talks about that he's challenging the darkness. Absolutely. This is how he challenged the darkness. Now, what is more important is how he challenged it, because he says it in the same speech. This world will not listen to the generalizations. He used the word in Punjabi, ankad, which are explicit numbers. So that's the work he created. He started. That work was eventually, I met with Sardar Jaspal Singh Dhillon when he visited within a year of that to US. I remember with other youngsters talking to him, taking him for his own torture analysis to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and talking to, when I went to Punjab, not just with him, but Muksar, who's still alive. They're both alive as well. And then eventually the lawyers. What I'm trying to say is that work eventually was then carried on, right? The idea is who's carrying on that work. The first part of that work happened under CCDP. I remember going to their offices, which they were given a small office by Sardar Gurtej Singh in Chandigarh. And people like Ram Narayan Kumar were working there, Harinder were working there. It was called Coordination Committee for Disappearances in Punjab. And they put out that report based on that initial work. So CCDP's work then took this to the next level, right? But then that work got stopped. And then the next level of that work was started by INSAF. So when diaspora is responding to this, diaspora is actually responding with documentation. INSAF has initially started with Jaskaran Kaur's incredible work and Sukhman Singh Dhami's incredible work. They are the ones who have documented this. The narrative part of this has been carried by with his own family and part of his organization called Khalra, a mission organization. But by Jaswant Singh Khalra's wife, Paramjeet Kaur, as well as his daughter Navkiran Kaur, as well as his son Janmeet Singh, they are the ones who have been vehemently and emphatically been talking about these issues when it was very trying. And remind you, it was in 1980s that he got married in his village, and then they moved to Amritsar. In fact, I want to mention something here because it is on public record as well. When he moved to his house in Amritsar, opposite of Guru Nanak Dev University, the house in Kabir Park, where he was picked up from and abducted, when that inauguration of that house happened, his wife talks about it, what was the command from the Guru Granth Sahib? And what did the Gyani ji at the time explain it? And the speech which Jaswant Singh Khalra gave that day. And you know what I want to share out of that? What came out of that was, and this is 80s. Okay, now 80s he gets married and then he moves into this house. I'm not sure of the exact date, but it's probably in the early 90s. And the phrase which gets used is that I may have a home now, but the Panth doesn't have a home. So this middle class sentiment and aspirations, marriages, everything is happening. His wife working at GNDU, she has a degree in library sciences, and then he's focusing on activism. She's focusing on the family, and she talks about it, that he had started to change by then. He had witnessed not just these what has happened in his leftist politics, not just what has happened in the legacy of his family, but what has happened in Punjab directly with the Sikhs. And this is the part which I think gets omitted a lot, but I do want to mention, coming back to it, the documentation is why he was assassinated. Within that documentation, it became clear that it is the political parties, it is the administrations, it is the intelligence agencies, it is the paramilitary forces. They were all in it together. And it eventually was acknowledged, but not fully revealed, in fact, sealed by the courts and the commissions, which is still sealed, by the way. But since he was able to establish that for at least 3 cremation grounds cases, that's why he was assassinated, because he brought out the truth.
Yeah, I think well said. I'm also like sort of shifting into thinking about what you said about like who continues this work, and also about what maybe feels sort of intangibly or more in a slippery way, like dangerous about having someone commit to that work and being willing to sacrifice his own life, like knowing that that would happen, or having some sense that that would happen. And what like sort of ripple effects that has amongst like other people who continue that work. And that I feel is like always a dangerous thing for any state that's acting with impunity, to see that the kind of ripple effects of that work. So I wanted to kind of go into a conversation about like legacy and narratives. We talked a lot about the work he did while he was here. And I like grew up in Maryland on the East Coast of the United States. And when I first heard about Jaswant Singh Khalra, it was in the context of that last speech that he gave, last international speech that he gave. And I think maybe I'd always sort of implicitly understood that he was a Sikh who lived in the diaspora. And when I got older and kind of like looked into who he was and into his work more, I remember being like very surprised to learn that he was from Punjab and like living in Punjab. And maybe part of that too is this like, and I'm just like thinking of this now, like maybe part of that too is like thinking that it would have been much too dangerous for him to have done that work while living in Punjab. So he must have been across the ocean somewhere. But I also wonder if some of this is due to the fact of that speech being delivered in Canada, or maybe how much his story is sort of told and retold and amplified in diaspora communities. So I'm wondering if you can speak a bit on this sort of phenomenon. Is it right to think that maybe his story is told more outside of India than within India, or is that just my skewed perception based on like my experience as a diaspora Sikh? Can you speak a little bit about that kind of dynamic between like diaspora and Punjab and Inspira?
Absolutely. I think this is one point where we have a very good news. Actually, everyone talks about story. The question is what gets amplified where, and what gets crushed where. So, like I said, the work started in Punjab. The supporters of the work were found in the diaspora. In Inspira, the lawyers who fought on these cases included people like, I remember meeting Nitya, and I remember meeting Ashok, and Ram Narayan Kumar. These were all not Punjabis, they were Indians. So because the story was of atrocities, and we are limiting it to that right now. I want to talk about that a little later as well. So the work was happening in Punjab. Punjabis were, PHRO was talking about it. His lawyer, Rajvinder Bass, who eventually did the cases, and the people who continued the documentation through Insaf, and other people who've started later in the years as well. All of that is happening in diaspora, in Inspora, as well as in Punjab. So everyone is on the same page on there. So don't play into this propaganda of that it is just the Khalistani politics happening from outside or within Punjab. None of that is true. That's a propaganda state created. Now, second thing to keep in mind is, yes, a lot of the work did happen outside Punjab. Because I even remember talking to Bibi Khalra and then conversations with his daughter as well, multiple conversations over the early part of the late 90s to 2000s. Look, and recently with Janmeet as well, when I saw him. The part to keep in mind is they're all in diaspora. So when you are in diaspora and the documentation project is being led by diaspora, but is being pursued in Punjab, field work is in Punjab, the court work is in Punjab and Delhi, this is how the unison of things are happening, right? So the reason we think sometimes it's diaspora only is because a lot of the work initially, after his demise, after his abduction and killing, I should say, and martyrdom, which I want to talk about the Sikh element a little later as well, is that because when the speech was put out, the last speech was in Canada. And I remember playing a small role within SAF when we had to put a transcription of that, that how do you transcribe it so it makes sense to the world? I was part of that as well, working with Jaskaran and Sukhman in those days. So diaspora played a very critical role. The essential role was played by Punjabis and Indians. This was one issue on the violations of human rights where there was no disagreement, regardless of where they existed on the globe.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Like that, the sort of like constellation of work and effort that's being put in. And I think that that's a good, it's helpful for me to understand things a little bit better.
Yes. And then the early part of the work happened during World Sikh Organization, which is where he was invited. I remember the MPs were there in London as well as in Canada. Because he in his speech said it, by the way. He's like, the propaganda they're doing now, it is essential for me to go travel to these places where the people will listen. Because in India, they're not listening to me right now. So he was looking for allies, both Sikh and non-Sikh. Both Indians, Punjabis, as well as in diaspora, because state was not listening to it. Its agencies and apprentice wasn't listening to it. So he came to diaspora and he was facilitated by many. Eventually, the legacy shows up in the Canadian Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg, because he's mentioned there as well. So the legacies will show up in many spaces, which we'll talk about as well. But the reason it happened initially is, and by the way, his wife is on record talking about this too, that when he started doing this essential work, it was pretty clear, like he had predicted what will happen to him. Like she's on record saying 2 years before he was abducted, if they're asking for my house, please tell them this is where I live, because I don't want them to hurt my family. They can take me whenever they want, because I'm available. I'm doing this openly. Similarly, he said, I would sleep in the living room, because if they do come to abduct, I don't want them, my young children getting affected by that. He talks about this, that from a Sikh inspiration in his speech, that the option is, even if nobody's talking about it, at least one lamp has to be lit. And then if that lamp is lit, if that is me, I embrace it. My training has been such, and activism and protests and understanding the politics, but now it's in human rights. And he says, but there's a Sikh element when he says, if it involves, if I'm gifted with the martyrdom, if daat je guru ne mainu bakshi, the is to vada gift hor ki ho sakda. This will be the ultimate gift to receive, and which he also received.
Yeah. I mean, so much, yeah, there's so much that it's kind of spinning in my brain now, but I think along that same line, because you've brought so much of this a key angle into this just in the last thing that you said. Um, and I'm thinking a lot about how we narrativize people like Jaswant Singh. And a really common phrase I've heard is like he's a famed human rights activist, which is like true and also not the whole story. And I know that because of how I've seen the kind of like process of sanitizing politically active figures works when like posthumously this kind of sanitization or like depoliticization of narratives that make those figures more palatable. Growing up in the US, I'm thinking, of course, of like MLK and Malcolm X, but also of like Nelson Mandela. Um, and I'm wondering what you can tell us about that sanitization of Khalra's story and life and what sort of deliberate omissions you've seen from that narrative. And one of those angles I think is like the Sikhi angle in a more in like a deeper way, maybe if I can say that, of like, yes, this sort of like pursuit of truth and justice feels like very rooted in Sikh principles, but I don't think that there's as much conversation about like that training that you speak of, the connection to Guru that one has to be able to commit themselves in that way, or the like assertions of self-sovereignty, which is a phrase that you've used in discussing him in other places of like all of this work as an assertion of self-sovereignty that itself is rooted in a relationship with the eternal sovereign, with a God. Like, what deliberate omissions have you seen from his narrative, and why are those things omitted? And then, sorry for a third question, what do we lose when we have those omissions?
So thank you for asking this question. This is a very important question. I would say it's both deliberate. Things happen knowingly and things happen unknowingly. They're happening at the same time. Um, I would say, look, we all understand that if you are an academic, you also pick and choose what story you tell to fit your frame.
Mm.
If you're a human rights worker or a human rights activist, then you pick and choose what will work to make the cases of what you are advocating or what you are proponent of.
Mm.
If you are a freedom fighter, you will do those things as well. If you're a politician, you will do this as well. We all do that,
Mm.
right? So I think it's both knowingly and unknowingly. But what is more important, this is what we try to do, our work is to tell a complete picture. And part of the picture, which is not being told on him fully, although few people do that, we have seen a barrage of publications and videos come out, and some of it is coming out. But the part which changed him since early 90s, he was already an activist. Just like, you see, when we started with the Gadar connection, let me start there. Gadarites were primarily Amritdhari Sikhs, but they had no problem working with leftists. Similarly, Jaswant Singh Khalra becomes an Amritdhari Sikh in early 90s. So now in activism comes what I like to say two different elements. And one element is of what we are inspired by Kaur, this divine inspiration. When your inspiration is coming from divine and not from a particular ideology or a particular subgroup or a particular regionalism, you will become vast. So you see him becoming vast. Mm. What he said about Akalis and Sikhs in 70s and 80s changed because he himself wrote it. And I want to get into that a little bit. What he himself wrote, not analysis on him. When we can keep analyzing and everyone's got their own ways of doing it, but we have documents available, letters available, what he wrote himself in mid-90s before he was abducted and assassinated and what we like to say martyred. So this element of Sikhi, he embraced Sikhi at the highest level, which means he received Amrit. When somebody receives Amrit, the two major things which happen are your larger inspiration is derived because Guru Gobind Singh and Guru Nanak Sahib taught us that the eternal sovereign is Ekoankar, the all-pervasive force, the creative force. So eternal sovereignty is coming to you in self-sovereignty way. Your inspiration is coming from divine. Of course, when it's coming from divine, because in Sikhi we don't have a separation between creator and creation, you are of everyone's, but you are in a much more vast-oriented manner. So he was divinely inspired now. And he was exercising his own self-sovereignty. In that state of existence, what he writes in 1992 onward, I think January 1992 is the first time he actually wrote in a publication which are available to us. And those publications were called Liberation Khalistan. And in first publication, he actually talks about Baba Jarnail Singh Pindrawale. He uses the term Sant, and he says the people who were, and I'm paraphrasing from Punjabi a little bit, or loosely translating, that what Sant Jarnail Singh Pindrawale was doing was cultivating this idea of freedom in Khalistan. But his cultivation of all that, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ, it came from Gurbani. He uses that word Gurbani. Now, this is very important because he says, without the Gurbani, Gurbani ਦੀ ਮੋਹਰ ਤੋਂ ਬਗੈਰ ਇਹ freedom achieve ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੀ, including in this Khalistan movement. And he uses the word Khalistan. So Gurbani and Khalistan gets used for the first time from his own pen and publicly presented in a periodical called Liberation Khalistan in January 1992. So that's the first thing I want to mention, that his embracing of Sikhi is articulated by himself in 1992. Second thing I want to mention is that he wrote the next, in the February 1992, in the second volume of that publication, he talked about, because Punjab had just gone through elections, the boycotts, which are very controversial. In that context, he talks about, what is this electioneering? Why are we taking sides of this and that? Where is the clarity on whether these elections matter or not? And in this context, he actually uses a number. And he's a numbers man. So he presents a number. He says more than 50,000 freedom fighters have been lost in the cause of Khalistan. Now, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਚ ਲਿਖਿਆ, ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਚ ਕਹਿ ਰਿਹਾ, but ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ 50,000 ਨੰਬਰ ਵਰਤਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ youngsters. And then he says, many are languishing in jail. He uses the word a hire. Hire is literally a diamond. And that's the term which gets used, kaum de hire, even today. If you listen to songs about Punjab and Sikhi, this is the word which is used a lot, and he used this word. And the other thing I want to mention then there is, he says, but what has happened now? And he names people. He says, what Bhai Satwant Singh and Kehar Singh, the two people, two individuals, two Sikhs, who were hanged for delivering justice to Mrs. Gandhi, who was in charge of creating the genocide of 1984. He says they have surpassed Sarabha and Bhagat Singh. Now, this is very important because he invokes the memory of Kartar Singh Sarabha, who went from diaspora in Berkeley to fight for freedom in India. And he worked with Bhagat Singh, who was a freedom fighter of the left in India, although son of Punjab, raised in Sikh circumstances as well. But this is very, very important because he came from the left world in his training. When he embraced Sikhi, he sees the martyrdoms and the contributions which Sikhs were making, not just in 1940s, 1920s through 1940s, even they were being diminished. The heroes of India were different. Even now, this is happening in Punjab, now meaning the 80s and 90s. And the number he puts is, another number which he mentions is 5 lakh, which is 500,000. He says more than 500,000 Indian army or paramilitary forces have been used to hunt Naujawan, Sikh Naujawan, he uses this phrase. So the point he's making is that we're dealing with a lot of draconian laws in Punjab. And he uses these phrases in February 1992. I want to just share this much, that this has been omitted by all human rights documentations,
Wow.
including the ones who were otherwise documenting and writing biographies in 90s. They have completely omitted these 2 or 3 elements. And then within there, when his own speech comes in. And that's very important because he says, what I am working on now is the 2 phrases in Punjabi he uses in that. He says, people who claim to be prophets of Messiah and people who are being labeled terrorists, they're two very different things. He says कि हुण पता लगूगा कि अत्तवादी कौन आ ते सत्यवादी कौन आ. Attavadi is quote unquote terrorist, and Satyavadi is quote unquote Sat is truth, truth exemplar, those who are speaking and living the truth. This is important from a Sikh angle because we use the word in Gurbani Sat and Sant. Sants are the ones who live the truth, not just speak it. What Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra did, he's following the tradition of Guru Nanak to Guru Gobind Singh. Guru Nanak started with documentation. He said it himself. Sach sunai si sach ki vela. Speak the truth at the moment when it's decided, when the truth needs to be spoken. He did that, and he received the Amrit of Guru Gobind Singh Maharaj, and he received the ultimate gift, which he himself, earlier, by the way, let me just do one more contrast. In 1970s, he called himself, he used a term for himself, that I was a social scientist. But in 1995, months before he's abducted and tortured and assassinated, he says कि हुण मैं गुरु दी दात जे मैनू बख्शी जाऊगी इस तो वड्डी दात कोई है नहीं. That I'm now hoping that I will also receive the ultimate gift of the Guru, which is martyrdom, which is shahadat. So this is the Sikh element, which needs to be, and it's important to tell that whole story.
Yeah.
You know, we are complicated people. We are products of our environment. We are products of what happens from a family legacy angle to Punjab legacy angle to leftist angles or whatever other angles we are involved in. Eventually, what he embraced was the Sikh element gifted by the Gurus through Shabad and Naam and of Shahadat. So that जैसे शहीद कह रहे हैं ना, इतने में ज़्यादा टाइम ले रहे हैं क्योंकि समझना बहुत जरूरी है. Shaheed is witness onto truth. Truth in with a capital T in Islam, where the word is coming from, is synonymous with Ikowankar, synonymous with eternal, synonymous with Vaheguru. So he's witnessing truth in the presence of the divine, in the presence of the one, and he's embracing martyrdom as gifted by the Guru. That's Bhai Jaswant Singh Khalra Shaheed.
Yeah, I think that this also makes me wonder about, the like omissions of things that maybe are considered too dangerous or like too inspirational and therefore dangerous. Or the things that maybe complicate who people are in a way that makes them less palatable for like a global audience. But I'm thinking now about Punjab 95, which is a film that was submitted in India 2.5 years ago, or maybe more, maybe you can correct me on that, to the Central Board of Film Certification, based on Jaswant Singh Khalra's life, and it's still like awaiting clearance to be screened. And something that I thought was interesting or sort of poignant, actually, is that the director of the movie said, I think it was this year, 30 years after Khalra's disappearance, his story has been like abducted once again. And the director and also Diljit Singh, who plays Diljit Dosanjh, who plays the protagonist in the movie, Jaswant Singh Khalra, they've both refused the 127 cuts that have been asked for on the movie. And they've also announced that if the movie's released without cuts or with cuts, they'll withdraw their names. So why is this movie not being released? Why the erasure? What is so dangerous or threatening about this story being told? Yeah, especially from the eyes of like the state and their narratives.
Well, I had the privilege of watching the movie. The director of the movie, Hani Treha, invited me to Bombay. I went to his studios and watched it right there earlier this year. What I can share is, because the movie is free of propaganda, that's why it's not being allowed. It is one of the few movies I have seen where, from a script writing to editing to dialogues, it's amazingly done, beautifully done. And this is not a Sikh story, the way movie is told. This is according to director, and I liked it, that's why. He said, this is not a Sikh or a Punjab or India story. This is a human rights activist story. This is why it is not being allowed. Now, I have much more I can say about it, but it is interesting on the kind of conversation we had. Let me plug it from that angle. So the movie is not being allowed in India, whereas the courts which are looking at this issue in Bombay, the judge has watched the movie and finds no objection.
Huh.
The production house which has produced this movie, this is Ronnie Screwvala, one of the, if not the largest, the second largest production house of Bollywood.
Wow.
So it is done properly. Diljit Dosanjh has done movies like Chamkila. So that tells us that India wants us to see only one version of Chamkila. They definitely don't want you to know about Khalra. Another thing to know about this is when they were not allowing this, they actually agreed to TIFF, which is Toronto International Film Festival. The last speech where Jaswant Singh Khalra gave was in Toronto. That was accepted. The name was changed from Kalukara, which was the original name of the movie, to Punjab 95. Even that, they pulled a plug on. They didn't want that shown. So Hani Treha has been showing it to people, to SGPCs, to human rights workers. It has complete endorsement of the family. In fact, I will say something here. Person who is currently the chairman of the Minority Commission in India has also watched the movie. He's a retired DIG, director, DIG of police, that is, in India. He, in fact, was an expert for FBI in America during the militancy periods. And I'm saying this on purpose as a profile so we can understand what is happening to answer this question. So the person who's a career police officer, who's currently the chairman of India's National Commission for Minorities, who is known for the arrest of Jarnail Singh Pindrawale, who investigated the 1978 Sikh Nirankari clash, which created the precursor to 84 partly, who served as in key positions in Punjab Police and border districts especially, and retired as a DIG of Punjab Police. He was a SSP of Amritsar, which is Senior Superintendent of Police, SSP of Taran Taran, and the then SSP of Taran Taran, Ajit Singh Sandhu, is the one who, on the orders of KPS Gill, did the abduction of Jaswant Singh Khalra. And I'm connecting all those dots. That individual saw the movie with the hope that that can convince the administration that there is nothing wrong with it. In private capacity, he watched it. He said there is nothing objectionable. It is fully accurate, but it's still not being allowed.
Wow.
So this is what I want to talk about, the word propaganda part again.
Yeah.
The police called it propaganda, KPS Gill at the time. And then the Indian administration called it propaganda, what Jaswant Singh Khalra did. Guess what? The movie itself is so free of propaganda. The movie is done by Sikhs and non-Sikhs and Bollywoods. And it is an incredible project coming together where the storytelling, the editing, the family, the facts, the Gurbani, the Sikh element, the Punjab element, the left element, the human right element, the CBI, all of that is in there. Even then, it's not being allowed. Why? Because it goes after the very basic question. State has something to hide. State does not want to acknowledge its wrongdoings because it involves not just one political party of the time, which is Indian National Congress. It actually involves paramilitary forces, police, local administrations, organizations like CBI, the National Human Rights Commission, and many other spaces. Look, this really is an opportunity for India, if I may say this. If it really wants to clean its conscience, it really wants to create an opening with people of Punjab, with Sikhs, for reconciliation, the number one thing you have to do is not allow the truth to come out. You know why? What they said in the 127 cuts? They said take out the word Punjab Police. So what's the story left? There are many things that absurd, yes.
Wow.
So if you cannot tell the truth, then Satyamev Jayate is an empty phrase for India. Now, Sikhs have been talking about it, and in this larger context of Jaswant Singh Khalra talks about it. This is why he was abducted, tortured, and assassinated. If that movie is not coming out because the Indian state, with all its apparatus, is not ready for acknowledgement, and definitely they're not ready for reconciliation with both Sikhs and Punjab and human rights violations within current India.
Wow. Yeah, I'm also like thinking about this now because there's a lot there that's surprised me, including the omission of the cut of like even saying Punjab Police, which is like I imagine that that's said so many times in that movie, or at least implied. Um, I just I'm now wondering about this larger question of like legacy and commemoration and um in that kind of constellation that we talked about earlier of Inspira, diaspora, and also in Punjab. Because, like, for example, I know that, like, earlier this year, a school in California was named after Jaswant Singh Khalra, and then BC declared September 6th, which is the anniversary of his death, Jaswant Singh Khalra Day. Um, so in light of those two things, and then also in everything that you said, in light of everything that you said about the movie, like what kinds of commemorations have you seen in India, if any? Because I imagine that there's much more that has to be kind of considered. And why do you think that he's not been commemorated on a larger scale? Or maybe he has, and I just like haven't um, heard about it or known about it. Yeah, I'm wondering about that larger question of commemoration.
See, commemorations are meaningful if there are changes in policy and changes in educational curriculums. That's my belief. Everything else is done, whether we are writing, whether we are documenting, whether we are talking about it, to get there.
Yeah.
And we are not getting there. So number of books which has come out is amazing. It's good to see. Again, nobody can do complete justice, but there have been meaningful contributions. Gurmeet Kaur wrote a book. Ajmer Singh has written a book. Family has been continuously talking about it. Not just a school through the efforts of Jakara movement, but several. For example, tournaments have been named after Jaswant Singh. So culturally, I'm using the word culture at large, whether it's the sports people, music people, movie people, human rights people, sovereigntists, freedom fighters, they all have been commemorating in their own ways. But the reason for commemorations are two. One is allowing the completion of that work and then acknowledging. You know what India has done so far through even National Human Rights Commission? They basically have done two compensations. And this is very important to understand. I am not against compensation, but compensation in a ceremonial way is also not an answer in itself. एक पहली compensation है ना जब courts ने admit किया 1800 people in Punjab were given 175,000 rupees. That's how they valued life. Second time, when they discovered it a little bit more, then they upped some of them to 250,000 rupees. That's it. The work which has happened is all independent of the state. And that work is still not, so there is conviction. Obviously, there were conviction of Jaswant Singh Khalra's case. So that did happen, which I referenced earlier. But the work he was doing, the records of that work throughout Punjab, beyond those 3 cremation grounds cases, was sealed and not allowed. There are policemen who were named even in those 3 cremation grounds where 1,800 compensations happened. Their names were eliminated. So they cannot be tried. So this is what we call cover-up. The fight for justice, which is very big internationally, which is huge in Sikh tradition, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਿਆਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਗੁਰਬਾਣੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, that's what this is about. Punishment is still secondary. You're not even allowing the complete inquiry and commissions to get done. You're not allowing for that. You're not acknowledging the deaths. How can there ever be a closure? So, let me connect it to today's India and Punjab. This is why, whether it is the Congress party, whether it is the BJP party, whether it is the Akalis, whether it is AAP, whether it is Khalistani allied Punjabi Sikh parties, they all have their work cut out in this regard. If you do end up in administration, which many have, they have done nothing about this. PhD scholars are writing from Delhi in a publication called Countercurrents, even on this anniversary. Harinder Singh Happy wrote an article acknowledging this. This is not a hidden matter. What is not happening is state and its agencies are not acknowledging it, not taking care of reparations, not working towards reconciliation will come much later. So this is a work cut out, whether it is the Punjab elections in a year and a half, whether we see how the narrative of during floods, we are going through Punjab is flooded. And what is every Punjabi saying now, whether they are Sikhs or Hindus, whether they keep here or not, ki sada koi nahi, because they are seeing nobody helps them. They just create a propaganda war against Punjab and Sikhs. So this is where our work is cut out. The allyship which is needed is people who will work towards delivering justice, delivering reparation, recalling. Eventually, there may be reconciliation. Otherwise, these wounds continue.
Yeah, I think that's like a perfect segue into our last question, which I've been reflecting on a lot now too, of like what do you think our responsibility is, banthically and personally, to the memory of Jaswant Singh Khalra's life 30 years later, 30 years after his death? And maybe you can talk a bit about how you personally feel his example resonating throughout the work that you do. And I think all of us are kind of asking this question of like how we can honor his life 30 years on, maybe beyond something like commemoration, which is meaningful in its own way. But yeah, this is a question I've really been pondering that I'd love to hear your thoughts on.
So, we have seen, I don't have a great answer to this, but I can share anytime I see an effort on something on by Jaswant Singh Khalra, because he really is about the global legacy from human rights angle, but a Sikh legacy from a freedom angle and Sikhi narrative angle. His story really, this is the anniversary of Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib, Martyrdom as well, 350th. Look how Jaswant Singh Khalra, 320 years later, fully embraced it. Fully. And his own journey is a testimony to that. This is what we need to do as Sikhs. At minimum, our job is to tell all elements of his story, as you said, without sanitizing, without omitting, whether we are comfortable with it or not. Eventually, every fight is about freedom. You may disagree with a particular elements of any freedom or freedom movement or its emissaries, but don't we all want freedom? Bani talks about salvation. Religions and different ideologies are always talking about liberations. We all want to be free as people, free of anything which binds us. And that's where number one legacy comes in, how he lived it in the line of the Gurus as a gift from the Guru. And the second work is, his work was all about documentation. The real legacy of his work is people who continue to document, people who continue to work in, as he called it, we are going to the courts, we are going to the commissions. He said it, these words. But he says the number one court in the world is People's Court. He says, now I'm going there. That's when he started traveling, because courts are not answering, administrations are not answering. So People's Courts, our job, all of us can do much more to take his contribution to People's Court, which is the global work. And those of us who are legally astute, those of us who are pursuing people like Ansaf and people who are continuing with other legal cases in Punjab and extrajudicial killings, people who are documenting what happened in this movement. So documentation as well as pursuing it legally, those were the two things which were his direct legacies as well. So I would say those are the best ways to do it. And anyone in India, in Punjab, in diaspora, in anywhere in the world, yes, we do want declare Khalra days. But remember when Mrs. Khalra ran for election twice, it is people who otherwise claim to be Akalis and Panthik also subverted it, also manipulated it. We need to end everyone's manipulation within the Panthik politics, manipulation within the Sikh politics, manipulation within the Punjab politics, manipulation within the Indian politics and diaspora politics. Don't just use his name. His real work is on documentation and legal fighting. And for the Sikhs, his real legacy is embracing everything of the Guru. Everything.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's been such a big learning for me too, is like thinking about the things that feel impossible about his persistence and his conviction and his bravery, and then knowing where it comes from. So I think also the work, at least for me, is about like strengthening that relationship, that like well that you can draw on in that way, in relationship with the Guru and with the God. So wonderful to talk to you today about Jaswant Singh Khalra. And I hope everybody else, that it's helping you reflect a lot on his life and his work and his legacy and how we might slot into it in some way, how we might continue in some way 30 years later. Thank you so much, Harinder Singh. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You were listening to Sickcast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.